Welcome to From the Periphery podcast. I'm Karena Avedissian, and I'm here with my co-hosts who are also members of From the Periphery, the collective, Leila al Shami and Ayman Makarem. In this episode, we're sharing stories of how different communities around the world are standing in solidarity with Palestine. Each of us will highlight examples from our own experience, showing ways solidarity is expressed, sustained, sometimes challenged. And at the heart of this conversation is a question many of us face. How do you keep going in solidarity when it feels like nothing changes? How do communities continue to show up, even in the midst of burnout? Today, we'll share examples that illuminate why we hope continuing to stand together matters. The idea for this episode came up during our conversation in a previous recording of the Fire These Times podcast, where we discussed the difficulty of witnessing the genocide in Gaza. And the idea came up, Leila al Shami brought up the idea that, why don't we record an episode discussing the more inspiring, the kind of, the positive, things that we're seeing coming out of this terrible, genocide that we're witnessing unfold. So that's where this idea came from. And yeah, we're going to speak about our different perspectives about like what we're seeing. Yeah, we'll take the conversation from there.
No, yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here for this conversation. I wasn't here for the Fire These Times discussion. I was actually in Beirut. I was visiting. And so here I'm gonna share like my experiences and my knowledge from Lebanon of like not just solidarity activities, but also like it's very much our conflict, our struggle in many ways. I mean, the war is still continuous. Israel bombs Lebanon on a daily basis, even after its the so-called ceasefire agreement. I've got a lot of sort of observations, but also analyses about that. And because I've been living here in Europe, in Austria for the last 4 years, I can share some stuff about the solidarity activities and nascent movements. I wouldn't necessarily call it a movement. And so, yeah, I'm really happy to be sharing this space and look forward to this conversation.
Likewise, happy to be here having this discussion. And yeah, I would like to talk a bit about some of the initiatives that I've been involved in locally here in Scotland, and also some of the bigger issues relating to solidarity, like how do we keep momentum in the face of burnout, in the face of things in the ground not really changing, and why is solidarity important in such a context?
I think I'm kind of coming from, this Armenian lens. I'm Armenian, I live in Armenia, and I work on a day-to-day basis on sort of Armenian issues, writ large. And watching the genocide in Gaza unfold has shown me kind of different things. I mean, in some senses, it's sort of reinforced certain ideas that have been kind of coming up since the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh in 2023. So just for context for listeners, Artsakh was ethnically cleansed by Azerbaijan in September 2023, maybe I think 10 days or so before the October 7 attacks. And so Armenians kind of, at least politically engaged Armenians didn't have a chance to kind of breathe between one tragedy and the next. But it was really, a conversation that I had with Anna, who is also a member of From the Periphery, about, this importance of kind of holding Azerbaijan to account for its ethnic cleansing while watching this genocide accelerate in Gaza and watching this like really public, violence annihilation from a people who are making the same demands in terms of international law and human rights. And it was when Anna kind of turned to me and said, it's when I realized we were fucked, because it's almost as though it's creating this new standard for how the world sees what genocide, quote unquote, is supposed to look like. So in many cases, it's like, not kind of comparing different kinds of violence and oppression, but really kind of understanding the precedent that Gaza is also setting for other struggles around the world, other, cases of ethnic cleansing, targeting identity, colonialism, and that kind of violence. It's almost like, watching people deny the genocide in Gaza, it just makes everyone else think, like, how are we supposed to prove what's happening in these other places given that kind of level of violence? And I think it's really demotivating. And I think, this is again part of that conversation of why, you just kind of need to keep going no matter what, despite that kind of, obstacle that's kind of been put in our path.
And I remember having those discussions with you at the time, Karena, because there was such a different response to what was suffered with the ethnic cleansing of so many Armenians from their land and from their territory, and then the escalation in Gaza. One motivated a large global solidarity movement, and the other didn't.
Yeah, I think there's that sort of almost like a fallacy that just because there's attention being given to something doesn't mean that it's stopping or it's any better for them.
That was a real learning experience, specifically for the Armenian community, because for a long time, Armenian institutions have been dominated by this narrative of, awareness. If only people knew about what's happening to Armenians, then it'll stop. And Gaza proved that wrong.
It's a difficult situation, isn't it? Because there becomes like situations of hierarchy and competition within the framework of solidarity, because not all struggles receive the same level of attention. Certainly, coming from Syria, and the struggle in Syria received so little solidarity globally. For many things, many horrors that we're now seeing in Gaza, which also happened in Syria, in Aleppo, in Wadamiyeh, in the communities which were besieged and starved, including Palestinian communities. Yarmouk camp in the suburbs of Damascus was horrifically bombed and also subjected to a starvation siege. So I don't really know what I'm saying about it.
No, I think there's definitely something there. I mean, we're talking essentially about a sort of a necessity for an intersectionality from solidarity movements. And to me, my main thing is it was just a small thing, but I think it captures so much. There was this musician in, I think, Glastonbury who was up on stage and he was like, y'all want to free Palestine, y'all want to free Sudan, y'all want to free whatever. And he's like, why don't you, like, no, free Europe, like free, like he's speaking to Europeans, to British. And so for me, one thing that I hope comes from some of these movements is an understanding genuinely, not just in terms of like adding new names to an already existing slogan, but understanding that intersectionality, like that it's their governments, I keep talking about this to people here. It's like, it's not about like, especially as Austrian citizens, for example, or European citizens in the European Union, like it's not very productive, in my opinion, to be thinking about Palestine as a thing that's happening over there, but that the weapons are coming from here, the support, the diplomacy. And again, this sort of boomerang effect of like the rise of the right, who are really monopolizing this moment and really like capturing it, because Islamophobia is so normalized, because there's this open genocide against, I mean, Palestinians, but also against Muslims. And so there's that, death to Arabs is a normal phrase. Like it's accepted. They can, like, Israelis can come to Europe and chant this, and it's not seen as like hate crime or like, a motivation towards ethnic cleansing. And so there's very much like a need, in my opinion, if these movements are to be powerful, that the solidarity becomes a part of a wider movement to fight for themselves, to fight for their own community, to fight against the far right here, but also against the sort of capitalist bourgeoisie.
I think it's really interesting that there are these leftist critiques of intersectionality, right? Of being like too abstract or too theoretical, when instead you could just focus on, how these overlapping material struggles create these opportunities for solidarity. One thing I noticed, and maybe this, you kind of end up hanging on to any semblance of hope of something changing. And one thing I've noticed, at least on social media, in my, little narrow world of what Instagram shows me in the algorithm, is this seemingly increasing awareness on behalf of different publics of sniffing out the bullshit. Like, for example, when celebrities are now only speaking out against what's happening in Gaza. I feel like previously people would have been satisfied and happy with the symbolic kind of, Madonna is, calling on the Pope to whatever, intervene in Gaza when she, she's had 2 years to say something. And then, she saved her most emotive language about, to talk about or mention October 7th. All the comments were just people saying like, fuck you. Like, where were you? Like this too little too late. Same with you too. People were posting things about it. Just, I feel like, and this is just my sense is that people are like onto their bullshit. If it's not material, if you're not putting your neck out there, stretching your neck out, it doesn't count.
Yeah. No, and it's making me think actually, because I think yesterday I re-encountered a phrase I hadn't heard in a while, which is this is going to sound a bit like left wing, but there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. And that really dominated a lot of like discourses up until a couple of years ago, but that completely contravenes with the boycott movement. You know what I mean? And to me, now have like I just try to set my mind back like 4 or 5 years ago, where like believing in anything, believing in a cause, advocating for something, doing anything earnestly was seen as online as cringe, as you're a bit naive, whatever. And same with this idea of boycotting or like in some ways, even though I have a very critical notion of this voting with your dollar kind of thing. But yeah, I think some of the shifts I've seen in the last 2 years because of Gaza, because of Palestine, is that I think there is a return to a kind of genuinity.
Leila, I was curious about because like you speak a lot in the group about going to the Palestine solidarity demonstrations in Scotland. I was like, when you mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah, you've been doing this for a long time. And I was actually curious to hear more about that. Like, who do you see there? Who do you know? What are what's the framing? What's the mood? What's happening?
So, yeah, I can talk a little bit about the Palestine solidarity activism that I engage in locally. I think not because it's anything unusual, but I think the kind of work that the group I'm involved in does is kind of the bread and butter of what most Palestine solidarity looks like around the world. And following October the 7th, 2023, a couple of people in my community set up a Palestine solidarity group locally. And people are coming from all of the villages around to participate and have been going to protests every Saturday since then until now. Not massive numbers, but consistent numbers. Also doing a lot of awareness raising work, things like we've done film showings with Q&As afterwards of Palestinian films. We did a cooking event of Arab food, which was very popular. We're also lobbying local MPs and our local councillors to get them to raise in the parliament questions relating to Palestine and to take a stronger position. we're also part of the BDS campaign. We've been lobbying our local council to divest pension funds from companies which are complicit in Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide. So, at the moment, in recent days, there's been a lot of pot banging because there was a call from Bisan in Gaza to do banging. And because we're quite dispersed rural communities, we've been sharing videos on the group chat. Sometimes it's like 5 people in one tiny village, which is only like 10 houses or something. But you feel that, there's something happening. You're part of a local movement. It's been very nice for me to be able to be involved in internationalism locally, because since moving to Scotland from the Middle East, I often felt quite isolated, that I didn't have that around me. But then the question is how to keep going when your actions have so little impact.
I would find it really unsurprising if someone looked at this really small scale showing up for Palestine in rural Scotland to say, what's the point? You're such a small group. You're in, a village in Scotland. What are you going to change? And I'm reminded, not to go back too much into like theory and social movement theory, but there is this idea of movements in abeyance. So this idea that when a movement is mobilizing, and movements mobilize and then demobilize, right? But the social networks remain, and they're really important. And they're the things that sustain movements in future cycles. So it's you don't know what is going to happen in the future, but having those social networks, that face-to-face kind of knowing one another and having that, common meaning making, that why you're there. You're looking around at other people and you're like, okay, I'm not the only one feeling this way about this injustice. There are others. And that also in itself is really transformative and can keep you going in those other moments. So it was just something I thought of when I was thinking about the theme of this episode of, why bother?
I agree with that completely because, like you say, you're building these face-to-face relationships with people. You're building strong resilient activist communities, which is going to be so important to face the challenges that we all know, are going to come across in the next few decades as we move towards more ecological and societal collapse, unfortunately. So yes, building these networks, I think it's very important to work on 2 levels. One is about building internationalism globally, trying to connect different struggles together. And a lot of my work is also around that, trying to connect struggles in Palestine, Syria, Ukraine, in different places and build internationalism. And then really working on the local level where you are to build like strong territorial roots, supportive communities. And I've seen that with my local Palestine Solidarity campaign, that also it has been engaged in other issues not directly related to the Palestine mandate. For example, when Trump came to Scotland, people were out protesting against Trump. There's also been a lot of overlap with initiatives in the area which are working to support refugees and to challenge the far right, who have been also mobilizing locally in our areas full of hatred towards refugees and immigrant communities. So there's a lot of overlap and people are starting to work together across a wide range of issues. And I think that's very important to do that.
I want to add something actually, because a part of it is networks, but I think a big part of it is also building a kind of experience and knowledge. I think in many ways, part of the issues we're facing now and our inability, globally speaking, or in many different places, to affect any change in Palestine, but also in our own governments and structures of power and whatever, is because we're late. We're late to the game in a kind of sense. I don't think of history in that way, but you know what I mean. And so it's like when the moment of crisis hit, and then the genocide in Gaza really was escalating, it was people's first times out on the streets in many cases, you know? It was the first time people felt politically kind of like engaged and enraged. And so I think, like in many cases, it's people have to learn, and they are learning, not just like what it means to organize a protest, but then also what it means to do solidarity, but also to do something impactful, how to organize. So in my own experience in Lebanon, one thing that I definitely think about, and especially in thinking about how these networks appear and disappear, but the kind of like base, again, not just networks, but knowledge exists. And so I was thinking when you were talking about the Karena, it's like that's why in the FDP collective we think a lot about like mushrooms, the mycelium, the network that's underground that only sprouts whatever, or comes to the surface. Is that in the recent war, the escalation with like 1 million displaced people from the south coming into Beirut and the areas around Beirut, within the context of just like a failed state, like Lebanon, the state it's nothing. It's whatever. It exists, but it exists only to like oppress and repress and like benefit the bourgeoisie. There were a lot of immediate grassroots activities. People set up shelters, people organized amongst each other, cooked food and distributed it. A lot of little shit, but like it's substantial. And like, again, there wasn't these shelters that were ready for people. And to me, the fact that that happened so quickly, and so efficiently and so kind of widespread is the fact that this isn't our first experience with crises. That after the port explosion in 2020, there was also likewise this kind of like spontaneous grassroots response. Same with COVID that started a few months before that because the government wasn't doing shit. And so a lot of communities were just like separated from each other, but not really able to sustain themselves. So you had a lot of these like mutual aid, grassroots, basically like distributing food or medicine or like checking in on each other. And all of that to me starts with like the revolution in 2019. And so to me, I see this kind of like building off of each other, like an awareness of there wasn't even a moment like of what I saw with the displacement of 1 million people from the south of Lebanon into Beirut and its surrounding areas. There wasn't a minute of like, oh, it's fine, the government will take care of this, you know, because khalas, we know. And so I think in many ways that knowledge even of like not even expecting or waiting or wasting time on those in power to do the right thing, that immediate we need to take care of our own, and then the knowledge of how that works and how to work with other people and how to just assess people's basic needs and address them and whatever. And so I think in many ways the inability to affect any change in Gaza comes from the fact that, yeah, in these places that thought they were democracies had to learn that actually that's not how it works. That I think there's this like knee-jerk idea of things will be fucked, we'll go down to the streets and they'll change their ways. And I think people had to learn, you know, unfortunately, and I find this like horrible, many had to be sacrificed in this or not sacrificed, sorry, that sounds terrible, but you know what I mean, like the people paying the price for that lack of knowledge are Palestinians and Lebanese and Christian, you know, Yemenis and Syrians and the like most importantly Palestinians in Gaza. And I find it kind of beautiful in a sense that like people are taking calls from people in Gaza, like the bang of the pots. But I think that also reveals to me a kind of, yeah, a sort of unpreparedness to meet the moment, to have their own strategies and their own theories of what we need to do as people in the UK. Because again, like you're definitely experiencing now, Leila, and a lot of people, there's this authoritarian backslide. that people need to deal with their own understanding of being in the UK as a UK citizen and the like. And so that brings me to that earlier point of the struggle for Palestine in all these contexts manifests also in their own struggles against their own rulers. So yeah, that's my long-winded thing.
Yeah, but I think you raise a very interesting question, Ayman, that a lot of the work that you see being done on the ground is always reactive. When there's an emergency or a crisis, people do step up and they do mobilize. But then how do you keep that going long term? How do you manage to build some kind of political and material autonomy that can go forward with a larger strategy of what you want to achieve? I mean, also, a lot of the protests in the UK for Palestine, the main demand is for a ceasefire. And of course, it's vitally important to have a ceasefire. It's vitally important to get aid into Gaza. But it also needs to be part of a broader decolonial perspective for Palestine. The suffering of the Palestinian people did not start on the 7th of October. So it's really about how do we also address the root issues.
Yeah, and like you said, and this is something that I've had many conversations with people when I was in Lebanon, is the fact that all this organizing and grassroots, like meeting of the moment of crisis, but then once the crisis ended, I mean, when the ceasefire and a lot of the displaced people returning, and the sort of a calm, relatively, even though again the bombing still continues, all that organizing effort ceased because there wasn't that crisis. And to me, I am like, I get it. I couldn't really push more of like, no, you need to keep going because, like we've been saying, there's burnout. It's exhausting. And there's a lot of these people that are living in the exact same situation. It's not like they're coming from abroad, from a position of safety and then returning to that safety. It's like and so that is something that I think a lot about because I think that's the only real way forward. But it's almost that like, it's not a contradiction, but it's just this, what needs to be done doesn't seem to be viable at an emotional or psychological level to sustain. But yeah, organizing after the crisis is something I think a lot about, or organizing between crises.
Like, despite, Leila, your points about thinking more broadly, thinking more long term, connecting these mobilizations into and kind of organizing them into something more sustainable. Feels like I'm almost tempted to say, does it need to get worse for people to be forced into that kind of like surviving? But at the same time, I was thinking, even just in the short term, it feels like, especially in the West, and Western liberal democracies that are kind of backsliding into authoritarianism, that you could argue that Palestine solidarity, organizing, participation in demonstrations and movements, meeting other activists is almost like learning survival skills because you do learn. I mean, I'm also like, Ayman, when you were talking about, the mutual aid stuff that was happening in Lebanon, and actually, Leila, also I was thinking about the communes in Syria. Like when you're, in this environment of just like total, helplessness, you only have each other, you create these systems that work for you. I mean, that's what mutual aid is, like, I guess. But it is really skills that you learn organizing to kind of to take care of one another. I've been at demonstrations where they had like a first aid kind of thing set up there. So, even that, I remember the first time I saw that years ago, I was like, wow, that's so innovative. And it's really not, but yeah.
Well, the fear is, though, I think in those situations, there's opportunities for both cooperation and for a kind of domination. When people feel helpless, they're very susceptible to someone saying, "Hey, don't worry, I'll take care of you." And I mean, I've seen this in a very micro sense, even in the solidarity movement here, wherein you have very problematic, authoritarian figures that like kind of feels good because it feels like they are going to lead us to victory.
Like daddy's gonna come and
Daddy's gonna come, yeah.
take care of everything.
And who's the next daddy?
I mean, the other big challenge that people have to face is the criminalization of solidarity and how our own like democratic freedoms here in the West, particularly around the right to protest, is being really dismantled. And we've seen that very much in Britain with the environmental movement being criminalized, and also now with Palestinian activism being criminalized. And it's worked on many different levels for having political figures saying that from the river to the sea is like a huge anti-Semitic statement and means that you want to kill all Jews, so that anyone saying that in a protest shouldn't be allowed, to the recent criminalization of Palestine Action. And for those who don't know, Palestine Action was a solidarity initiative with Palestine, which was engaging in direct action tactics. So, for example, they blockaded a weapons factory that was supplying weapons to Israel. This group has now been prescribed as a terrorist group. So, under UK law, membership of that group is the same as being a membership of ISIS or some far right Nazi group. It's in the same league. And people are challenging that. Just last weekend, there was a mass protest organised by a campaign called Defend Our Juries, which encouraged people to go and hold placards saying, I oppose genocide and I support Palestine Action. And something like 530 plus people were arrested under the Terrorism Act for holding that sign, many of them more elderly people as well. There were a large number of people over the age of 60 that were arrested. So it just shows how much the environment is clamping down. I know that's very much impacted in the discussions in my local Palestine organising group. People are a bit worried what they can share in our WhatsApp group relating to Palestine Action, what the limits are, what we can say, what we can't say in protests, always being very consciously aware that anything that we do say is going to be taken in bad faith and used against us. And we have actually had far-right groups in the local area lobbying the local council to get our protest banned for a whole host of reasons, saying that we're disrupting trade in the city centre, we're being very noisy, things like this. So it is difficult to just maintain a space, that people can continue to protest. And we're up against so many challenges and so many restrictions. And this shows us that the issue is much bigger than Palestine here. It is really a breakdown of kind of, the democratic rights that we take for granted in the West.
Yeah, 100%. I think that connects so much to exactly like to what I was saying, the necessity of understanding the intersectionality of the fact that, and now it's becoming much, much more clear that, yeah, it's becoming, you don't even have to care about Palestine to be as a UK whatever. If you believe a part of your identity and a part of what the UK is rights for its citizens, whatever. Yeah, some of this footage, it's ridiculous. And this is all under a Labour government, which I find kind of just bizarre. The whole thing, everything, it's been very hard to stay in touch with the reality these days. And I think that is part of the reason for despair, where it really is pushing the limits constantly of not just what Israel's allowed to do and what it's just keeps doing and brazenly and everything, but then what the UK government is kind of allowed to do, and that it sort of passes. And there is it's a paradigm shift that we're still in the midst of, that is shifting so much. And I think keeping up with that has been very difficult for people.
Yeah, it's hard to maintain the energy in the face of so many restrictions against us. and also not feeling that you're affecting change. And I get a lot, you have younger members of my family saying to me, what's the point to protest? It doesn't change anything. And I always say to them, well, it's true that many protests don't change anything. But then all of the big changes that you've seen to do with women's rights, workers' rights, civil rights, all happened on the back of a massive protest movement and mass mobilization. So it's true that you may not achieve anything, but you won't achieve anything at all without trying.
Yeah, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. But also, if it didn't change anything, why are they clamping down so hard on them? There's also that aspect of it where it's like, and again, I think Palestine Action and it being centered so much is very, very interesting because it's a direct action group. And so again, like a part of it is the diversity of tactics that we're seeing across the board that I think is necessary. You know, that there's many different things because again, we're late to the game in many ways, and so I put down protest as if it were the sole tactic. I have a lot of issues with that, but I think in a melange of different tactics and forms of organizing, it being a space to meet people to then do other stuff because we are very isolated.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's vitally important is meeting other people, especially also linking back to the feelings of despair and the feelings of burnout. It's really important to have a community around you that can, hold each other and support each other through those dark feelings. And I mean, there's people that come to my Palestine Solidarity group or the group that I'm involved in, and they have no background at all in the Middle East, maybe no background of activism at all. But one young mother, she said to me, I just can't sit at home and watch these images on my TV every night. I feel that I have to do something. I have to take action. And, she's learned so much now from the group. She's, really engaged in it. And I just think that's wonderful. But the other thing I want to say is even if you don't feel that you're making change, there's something so important about visible solidarity for people who are the victims of this oppression, of this genocide, of this horror. It gives them some strength to keep going. No one wants to die in the darkness. No one wants to not be remembered who they are. And just coming from, the struggle in Syria, I think that was one of the very difficult things for Syrians to deal with, was that the fact that most people in the world just didn't care that they were being killed. So, even if you don't feel that you're having an impact, for sure, there's people in Palestine that are gaining strength from knowing that there's a few small number of people in rural Scotland that are doing something because they do care. That's just vitally important.
It is. It's also important to, I think, in this, the burnout that we feel, the helplessness, the powerlessness, which is, I'm sure some of us have probably said, part of the point is to kind of, make a sort of demonstration of this violence and kind of show everyone that there's nothing you can do about it, which is incredibly disempowering. So I think even the smallest, maybe not the smallest, but I think showing up physically somewhere, even if someone can counter that by saying, what's the point? You can say I'm practicing agency. I'm not just sitting at home doing nothing, posting on social media. What I'm like coming out, and I've like decided to act in response to what's happening, in response to the world, which is such a, I think, powerful, even if it's really small, way of sort of acknowledging intrinsically that you are connected to these other struggles and it matters to you. And multiply that by however many people are doing that, wherever they may be. Yeah, so with that said, I think that's a probably good place to wrap up. I wanted to thank my co-hosts, Ayman and Leila, And would you both like to plug your podcast before we sign off?
Oh, sure. I mean, I've got Politically Depressed. I just released an episode today where I talk about my time in Beirut. And otherwise, I'm working on a video essay on the Druze, which is a topic that's very misunderstood, but very much so in the news. And so, as a Druze person, um, I'm doing a video essay, which is like the religion, but also the politics and the society, because those are very different things. And yeah, thanks for having us, Karena. But yeah, Leila.
Yeah, thank you for hosting, Karena. And my podcast that I'm focused on at the moment is called Syria, the Inconvenient Revolution. Talking all things Syria. The last episode was actually with Karena, talking about Islamized Armenians in northeast Syria. So do check that out. Also, hoping to do a recording in the next few days on Swather, which has been a very big issue and it's just been quite difficult to coordinate doing that with my guests, but that will be coming out soon.
Great. Thank you both.
And thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, check out our Patreon. And with that said, see you all next time.
What Ayman said.
Oh, okay.
I think we could just use what you just
Okay,
said
sure,
and
sure.
just
Yeah,
be funny and
use
be
it.
cute about it. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Include
okay.
me laughing at you so that it's not totally out of left field.
And it doesn't feel like I'm mansplaining.
No, no.
So, okay. See you all.
Yay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you
Thank
for
you. Nice to
joining.
see you both.